This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. Hello, everybody. I'm Franklin Taggart, and this is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love working alone. I am one of you, and this podcast is for us. My guest today is someone that I've known for a few months now through the online communities that we're both a part of. Her name is Fran Gallagher, and Fran is a next-level guide, a purveyor of intuition, wonder, and awe. And in her work, she has a company called Really Flourish, LLC. And in her work, she helps people both with her intuitive gifts to find direction, but also helps them to activate and engage with their own intuition. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is how people who are like me and love working alone, how we can engage more intentionally with our intuition to get things happening for ourselves. Fran, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Franklin. I appreciate being here.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to that introduction as far as the things that you do, the things that you're interested in?
Yeah, thank you. I am calling myself a next level guide and an intuitive coach. I am in the process and have been for many years of identifying myself in ways that people can understand. But the main thing that I do is I shorten the amount of time it takes for someone to have a powerful experience through coaching. In other words, it's not going to take days, weeks, months, years, like so many traditional coaching or therapy relationships often seem to.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe how it's different?
Well, I receive information for my clients very, very soon after beginning to speak with them. Okay. And by sharing that information with them, they feel seen and recognized and understood, and we can experience rapport very, very quickly. Okay. I've often had people say that one session with me is worth 8 months or in another case, 2 years of traditional coaching or traditional therapy.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about when you discovered that you had this ability?
Sure. The very first time that it really stood out was when I was, I think about 17 years old, and I was working at a burger place, and I opened it in the morning, and my boss came in and said, "What did you do last night?" Well, in 4th grade, I had ordered a book about palm reading from the Scholastic Book Club. I don't know if your listeners know. And I tried to learn all about palm reading, and I really wasn't able to. Yeah. So by the time I was 17, I used palm reading as a party trick, because by then I was a skeptic and I thought that I was just hilarious with reading people's palms and making jokes. And I was really a fan of logic and science. So I just thought all that other stuff, I must have compartmentalized it in my own experience, in my own brain. So my boss said, "What did you do last night?" And I said, "I drank too much and I read palms." And he said, "Okay, well, read my palms." And I said, "No, it's a joke. I don't really read palms." He said, No, read my palms." I said, "No, I don't really do that." And he insisted, and he stuck his palms out. I took one look at them, and I said, "You know what? I really don't read palms." And he said, No, you saw something. What did you see?" And I said, "I saw cameras on a workbench. Who would keep cameras on a workbench?" And he went dead white, and he said, "I have a hobby making cameras. I have cameras all over my workbench at home."
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time I really saw something and brought it through without distorting it and gave it to the client. In this case, he really wasn't a client, but it resonated for him. The second major time was when I met a man in college, and I said, I can read your palms. We were walking on the campus and we were in the quad. And so we stopped and I read his palms and I said, you will have one child who will change your life. You may have other children, but this one child is going to change your life. Well, I didn't know that I was going to become pregnant with that one child. And it did entirely change his life, and it also entirely changed mine.
Wow.
So over time, I became a convert just because I couldn't deny what I was experiencing.
Yeah, it just kept happening.
Yes.
All right. And in that time, for many years, you did other things for work besides that. But can you talk a little bit about how it is that you ended up moving into an area where you could use that gift as a part of your work?
Oh, what a great way to phrase that, Franklin. So I generally don't tell people this part of the story, but I'm going to tell you and your listeners this part of the story. So as I said, I was a skeptic. And I saw Shirley MacLaine out on a limb, and the part where she has this guest appearance of a guy who was a channel. And I thought, what kind of crap is that? And I just thought he was overacting and fake. And it just was silly to me. And at the time, I was kind of lonely because my husband had talked me into moving from St. Louis to Denver, Colorado. I knew no one. And I lived to go to a nearby area's library, Bemis Public Library in Littleton. And they had these shelves of new nonfiction and fiction books, and I read everything. I always read everything when I was younger. And one day on the nonfiction shelf for new arrivals, there was a book called Opening to Channel. Well, I was totally shocked. How could a library be spending money on crap like that? So I got the book and I took it home, and I spent a few weeks trying to learn and follow the exercises and learn to channel. If this does not make sense for someone who claimed to have been a skeptic, I agree with you and your listeners. But so after many hours of trying, the best I could do was produce the letter M sound. I'm not making this up. And when I was done practicing, I would be sitting cross-legged on the floor with my back against the couch, and I would simply lean over and fall asleep. I was so exhausted from trying.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I was working off and on as a contract technical writer, and I got a contract for doing quality control on software. And it was software that would allow people in Puerto Rico to order to-go food from Kentucky Fried Chicken of Puerto Rico. And by the way, I would break the software if I ordered a large drink and a large order of fries. So I did that contract for 4 months, and it ended. And I came home and I picked up the book and I tried again. And it was as if I had been practicing for 4 months. I was suddenly able to channel.
Yeah.
So I started leading meditations for a small group of friends. And within about a week, one of them came to me and said, I have some friends, they're really having a tough time in their business, in their lives. Would you channel for them? My guide was named Artemis. And so I went to their home, and rather than bring through information about their business, my guide, Artemis, told them to stay with the company they had contracted with to get a baby, an adoption agency, and to stay with that company, that they would get a baby within the term that their contract was for. Well, their contract turned out to be for 6 months. And literally on the last day of the contract, they were notified that there was a baby for them.
Oh, wow.
So they were over the moon. And this was in Highlands Ranch a long time ago. They told people, and I became the flavor of the month.
Uh-huh.
People would come to see me. And I had a mentor who was a psychic. Her name was Mame. And she started having me read for her, which is what we in this business call it when we're reading energy to get information.
Right.
And so one day she said, "Honey, you don't need your little man anymore." And I said, "What?" She said, "Honey, you don't need your little man anymore. Your intuition is so strong that you're fine."
Yeah.
And I stopped channeling. And it turned out that working with this guide had boosted my intuition by quite a bit.
Yeah.
Now, I ended up deciding that channeling was not something I wanted to do, and I actually don't recommend it. It's a little bit tough on our sense of our own identity. And when I stopped channeling, I still brought through information. And one day I was working with a group of hospital CEOs through the Kaiser Institute, and Lee Kaiser was the head of the Kaiser Institute. And he came up to me afterward and he said, "You are being overshadowed by your guides." And I didn't know what that meant, but he said they stand to one side or the other behind you and they tell you things. And since then, I now experience that. So
wow.
I think that is psychologically healthier to experience overshadowing. It's healthier than I think channeling is.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about, like, I've heard from other people who have these types of gifts that at first it was sporadic and sometimes unpredictable, and then it became steadier as they engaged with it and practiced. And very similar to what you've described, where in some cases they were channeling, and then the channeling at some point tapered off, and they were then just speaking. They were able to actually integrate and see all of these things and be able to speak them. Can you talk a little bit about, as you developed that, how did the people that were closest to you respond to that?
Well, my oldest son used to introduce me to his friends. He would say, "This is my mom. She smokes crack." And I did not smoke crack, but that was his way of warning his friends that I was just a little bit unusual.
Yeah.
And then my younger son, when he turned 18, the night before his birthday, I woke up horrified from a dream. And the dream showed him partying in some way and driving and having an accident. And when I woke up, the guides showed me that it could be an accident anywhere from a broken ankle. I can still see his foot on the gas pedal in my mind.
Yeah.
Anything from a broken ankle to death. And so I'm going to switch to tell the story from his perspective. His perspective is that on his 18th birthday, his mom greeted him and said, "Happy birthday, you're gonna die."
Oh, great.
Because what I was just shaking and crying and upset.
Oh,
And
my
I
gosh.
came to him and I said, "Happy birthday, and whatever you're planning tonight, don't do it. Please not do it." Well, he criticized me and what I said and did, and he changed his plans, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
So then over the years, I would show up at the right time. I would call him just when he was going to do something that wasn't a good idea. We had a pretty extraordinary relationship for those years, and he was both annoyed and used to benefiting, shall we say.
Yeah.
One day he called me when I was driving home, and he was in his early 20s, I think, or middle 20s. And he was not then and is not now an especially patient person. So he said, Mom, when are you going to be home? I said, it's going to take about 30 minutes. And
Yeah.
he said, okay, I'll wait for you. He was at my house, and I was shocked because he would not normally wait for me. And I came home and I came in the living room, and he said, all right, I want you to sit down. And he was pacing, and he said, some people talk about having an angel. I don't know what they're talking about because you're my angel.
Yeah. Well, what a sweet thing.
It was. And uh, I'm sure it was also difficult having a mom who could see into his plans. Now,
Yeah.
he did fool me plenty also. I'm not saying I was all seeing or all knowing. I don't know that anyone is, but
Yeah.
it I received warnings or information. One time I received the message to go get him and take him to the hospital
Yeah.
out of the blue, and it turned out to be exactly what was needed. So uh, luckily, we don't have that kind of relationship anymore. He takes care of himself now,
Yeah.
and I'm not his angel. I'm his
You're just
mom.
mom.
Yes.
Well, Fran, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'd like to kind of move into the idea of that you've built a business around this, ability, and not only that, I'm sure that you draw on other experiences as well in your business to offer a very well-rounded kind of perspective. But talk to me a little bit about what have been the biggest. I don't want to say obstacles or challenges, but I'd like to know, like, when you were turning this into your livelihood and into your business, where were the places that it was difficult?
Well, one of the things that was difficult was that when I was a contract technical writer, and I mentioned the program in intuition from the Kaiser Institute. It was a high-end program designed to teach physicians and business leaders intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And one time I literally left a contract technical writing job, uh, not permanently, but I left it to fly to one of the resorts, which was where the program was held. And when I got to the program in intuition and needed to do intuitive coaching, they trained me as a coach. I felt that I was looking at the information I was getting as if through some sort of a box.
Yeah.
And it was because the logical side that I had developed to do step-by-step user's guides was an impediment when I switched literally in one day or within 24 hours to reading using my intuition. It was really a tormented couple of moments.
Yeah.
And the box then dissolved, and I was able to see as I had normally been able to do.
Yeah.
So it was really a challenge to go back and forth between the world of tech and the world of intuition. And I remember it was a tormenting moment to decide I needed to leave tech and go into intuition completely.
Tell me about that moment. I mean, it's like, I'm sure that there was a lead up to it of quite a while, but like, what was the decisive point for you?
Well, as background, I was waking up from a nightmare over and over again of being in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And I associated that with the commute I had to various tech writing jobs. Now, I have to admit, I stopped doing tech writing, went into being an intuitive coach, and went back and forth several times. I quit my tech writing business, I think 2 times, and returned to it, or 3 times. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was race walking. I know people think that's hilarious, but that's what I used to do for exercise. I was race walking along the green belt, along a path in the green belt in Highlands Ranch. And at the time, I was not, I didn't pick up rocks all the time like I ended up becoming that person. But I was going along and race walking, so at a little bit of a clip. And I was just tormented, wondering, do I quit my job? Do I start this other thing? What do I do? And I happened to look over, and about 6 feet off the path, among a lot of other rocks, was a rock. I just made a beeline to it. I picked it up, and on the bottom was a heart, perfectly drawn in, because it had been in a pool of water, and the minerals had left this, what one might have been a ring, except it was a heart.
Yeah.
And I took that as a sign. So I quit my job and I got an office. At first, I had an office at home. That didn't work so well. But then I got an outside office and I made it my business.
Yeah. How do you market such a thing?
Franklin, how do I market such a thing? I have struggled.
Yeah.
One of the things with the program in intuition was that I was highly intuitive, as I mentioned, but I also was highly logical.
Yeah.
And because I was from the world of tech, I dressed in a way and I appeared and spoke in a way that participants in the program felt comfortable with me. So many of them chose me as their coach when they graduated from the program.
Yeah.
So the program and the Kaisers really marketed me themselves. I didn't market myself. So I just received the clients who chose me, and the program acted as a funnel. And I wish I had had business skills. I did not. I did not maintain those connections very well. Believe it or not, I still have one client from the program in intuition.
Oh, wow.
And that's been, heavens, it could be 20 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So I just wish I had learned more. And now I am marketing myself and learning how to further market myself. And that's why I'm a guest on your podcast, Frank.
Well, I'm hoping that some clientele will emerge for you from this, in addition to just educating people about these types of things. I would like to talk about that a little bit. Many of the people that I am trying to reach with this podcast are people that I would consider highly sensitive. Most folks who listen and are interested would consider themselves introverted. Most of them are in creative pursuits. They have kind of a natural tendency to be intuitive, but they don't necessarily. I know I can only speak for myself in this case, but I know that my intuitive senses were not encouraged or looked upon favorably by people around me as I was growing up. So I kind of learned to either hide them or to ignore them or to just kind of shove them aside,
right,
in favor of reason and logic and all of that. And I can do reason and logic just fine. But pushing that part of me aside, I consider it kind of a wound for myself.
Sure.
And one of the big things that happened was that I got into my 30s and I couldn't ignore it anymore.
That's exactly what happened to me just a few years earlier than my 30s. Yes.
So the thing that I'm curious about for people who are listening, first of all, I just want to encourage them and say, if you find that you are an incredibly intuitive person and that you find your intuition really trustworthy, I just want I want to say, yes, that is you. That is all yours, and I support you in trusting that. But I'd like to hear from you, Fran, about how people can how people can do something similar to what you've described, where you cultivate that ability, that gift, that that communication. How does that develop, and how can people develop it more intentionally?
Well, I think most people are taken by surprise by it, the way I have been. While you were asking the question, I was trying to think of what's the first thing I would say, and there's so many first things.
Yeah, right.
The first thing I'm going to say right now is that the intuition is not rational. In other words, you are walking down the street and you get the notion to cross to the other side. There is nothing that precedes that. There is no logical sequence that goes from A to B to C or 1, 2, 3 that will give you the reason why you need to cross the street. But if you don't cross the street and Wile E. Coyote drops the anvil on you, you're going to then realize that you should have crossed the street. And I don't want people to be in that position.
Yeah.
I want you to go with it. Whether or not you are validated in the choice of crossing the street, cross the damn street.
Yeah.
Wear the red tie. Put on the suit when you're not sure whether you should, but you've got this idea that you ought to. Whatever it happens to be, don't take the highway, go the back way, whatever it happens to be. So the first thing is that the intuition is not rational. The second thing is that you will need to develop a feedback loop. So when you feel that you are receiving some kind of an intuitive hit, i.e., something out of the blue that suggests information or action, insight or direction, then notice what happens when you either follow it or don't follow it. Notice the result and let it feed back to you that your intuition was accurate. As you do this, you will develop your intuition. The third thing that I would tell people, what I teach, and I teach these things in my course, Trust Your Gut. Mm-hmm. The third thing is doubt is a hobby, and you can doubt as much as you want. You can have a field day with doubting your intuition. It will get you nowhere. We have to just know that the superego, the critical voice or the judge within that Freud identified and named as the superego, the inner critic is going to have a ball when you first start listening to your intuition or seeing things, feeling things, sensing things, knowing things, and you can doubt if you like, but it won't do you one bit of good, and it isn't going to improve your intuition. So sometimes I will receive an intuitive hit 2 times. Generally, if I'm not listening, I'm not going to get it a 3rd time.
Yeah.
My story around that was that I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I basically have hardly any symptoms because I am careful with my diet, and I've discovered the diet that can allow me to be symptom-free, more or less.
Yeah.
But when it started, it was just the occasional swollen joint, painful, red, and I learned to call it a flare-up. But it was years before I identified it. But this one time I was going on a trip to the mountains to take a class on hypnotherapy / guided visualization. And it was winter and icy, and I was packing, and I was getting my supplements, and there was a bottle of ibuprofen in the cabinet, and it was not close to the edge.
Oh, wow.
But suddenly it fell out of the cabinet, and I was startled, and then I thought, I don't need this. And I put it back, and I put it back far enough, but it fell out of the cabinet again. And so I thought again, maybe it means I need it, but I decided that I didn't need it. And boy, did I regret it.
Yeah.
So again, the feedback loop. And it was just difficult because I had to walk through the ice and snow to some sort of convenience store to buy ibuprofen because I didn't have any, because I didn't bring the bottle.
Yeah.
So not following your intuition can be just as instructive as following it.
It sounds like to me that for your experience, that clairvoyance may be a part of it.
Uh-huh.
Would that be accurate? So you actually see things happening in your imaginal area or whatever you would say. And for some people, it may come in another sense.
Exactly. So Jean Houston was the protege of Joseph Campbell
Mhm.
and the heir apparent to the anthropologist Margaret Mead. And Jean Houston, I went to one of her spiritual weekend retreats, and she said all the great minds of the 20th century had one or more of the inner senses.
Yeah.
So Aldous Huxley, in the book The Doors of Perception, talks about developing these inner senses. Einstein, for instance, had the gift of inner sight, and he imagined riding a light beam through the universe. And then what he observed, he used mathematics to describe.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't understand that Einstein used his imagination, used mathematics to describe what he experienced with his imagination, and then developed the theory of relativity, not
Yeah.
the other way around. So uh, as you develop your feedback loop and start to notice your intuition, you want to notice how it comes to you. It can come to you through any of the inner senses. We won't know right away which inner senses you have, but it could be inner sight, inner knowing, inner sensing, inner feeling, and they're similar,
Yeah.
inner taste, inner smell. When I used to work a lot on the phone, I would smell if someone, my client or someone in their world, smoked cigarettes or cannabis, for instance.
Yeah.
Not that I have anything against it. It was just that that might figure into what I was working with the client.
You would pick up on it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about like for some people, symbolism is very strong in this kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Has that ever been your experience as well, where there are potent symbols that appear or potent symbols that come to mind?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that. No one has ever asked me that. And I think it is part of this territory. So, for instance, I worked with someone earlier today, and the guides show me things. I call it that the guides are showing me something. And they showed me my client wearing a harness like a horse might wear to pull a wagon. And my
Hmm.
client was pulling against the harness, ready to burst the harness.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was saying that they needed to receive permission to step into their fuller selves. So, yes, I do think that our brains communicate with metaphor and symbolism on a regular basis. Sometimes it will be confusing. I remember long ago, a young man, he had a friendship, and I told him, you will end this friendship over a small thing. And I kept saying, I get stuck sometimes. I kept saying a small thing. Well, it turned out that his friend, they were out in a park drinking, and his friend produced a handgun
Oh my
and
God.
started shooting up signs. And that my client was so horrified that his friend would be so irresponsible that he ended that relationship over a small thing, which was a handgun.
Yeah. A small thing, big behavior, right?
Yes.
So those are some very insightful and helpful things for people to consider and think about. Um, Talk a little bit about how you help people. You mentioned your course, but what are some of the other things that you offer in terms of opportunities and services for people to explore that for themselves?
So if you go on vacation and you ask the post office to hold your mail, you won't be able to get your mail. You will have to ask a clerk. The clerk retrieves the mail and brings it to you and gives it to you. I'm that clerk.
Yeah.
All of us are going to miss messages from our guides, from our soul. We're going to miss information that is right in front of us. Of course, that happens to me in my own life. So when my clients come to me, I can deliver them the messages that they might not be receiving, they might not be able to pick up. The other thing is that I can ask the right questions and help get to the heart of things in a matter of minutes. If I may tell a story illustrating that,
Sure.
Franklin.
Absolutely.
When I was in the program in intuition, I was a bit of a darling for the founders, Kevin Kaiser and Lee Kaiser, Lee being the father, Kevin being the son. And Kevin would sometimes arrange a meeting for me with someone who was the head of a large organization, because that was my favorite, to be able to help people who in turn help thousands, if not more, people.
Yeah.
For instance, I worked with the head of the VA back then. And this man, I really wanted to impress him. Within a moment of meeting him, I was flooded with the taste, the smell, the sight, the knowledge of bazooka bubblegum.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, I was blonde, more blonde than I am now. And I really didn't want to be talking about bazooka bubblegum with the head of a large healthcare organization. However, I was so flooded with it that when this happens, I won't be able to get past it. So I said to him, why would I be tasting, smelling, seeing, knowing about bazooka bubblegum? And he said, oh, we have bowls of that on the tables for our executive team. And I said, who chose that flavor? Why not double bubble? And he said, he named someone, and I was flooded with the information that that person was cooking up a fraud and embezzlement scheme and was also behaving inappropriately in the workplace, sexually harassing another employee.
Yeah.
And I told my client to look at the cell phone records, and he would find this to be true, which in fact he did. And he was able to stop that scheme. He was able to find the records of the conversations that were inappropriate and release that person so they could do no more harm.
Wow.
And that doesn't happen every time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a calming conversation where we're exploring things, my client and I. But
Yeah.
when I get information, I bring it through for them. The other thing I do with my clients is that I lead guided visualizations for them so that they can get in touch with their own direct experience. Nobody has to believe what I'm telling them. They can have their own experience. Another service I provide is an energy clearing. So when we have relationships, we often take on the energy of other people, especially your introverted audience.
Yeah.
Many of them are highly sensitive, and one word for that is that they are highly empathic.
Yeah.
So we can literally feel other people's feelings, and we can literally take on their priorities and their agenda. And we can find ourselves being the best supporter of the people around us and not necessarily having our own priorities and taking our own agenda forward. So I help people get clear about that. I can kind of see, feel, sense, know what they really need to focus on. And I do this energy clearing technique that can make an enormous difference for people.
Very cool. So there are a wide variety of things that Fran offers. And tell us, Fran, how people can find you if they're interested in knowing more about you.
My website is reallyflourish.com. You can schedule through my website. You can also text me, phone me, or email me. I do prefer texting for my quickest response.
Yeah.
And if you phone me and leave a voicemail, I would prefer that you also leave a text with your contact information, because nowadays with cell phones, it can be, my number is 72597, nothing else.
And you're
So
not that psychic.
I'm not. No, I'm not. Thank you.
Well, so if you want to get in touch with Fran, reallyflourish.com. And Fran, there's one last question that I have, and that is like, what are the most common misconceptions that people have about intuitive gifts?
That they are woo-woo, and it's fine for somebody else, but that's not my thing. That's great, but please, let's all avoid the anvil being dropped by Wile E. Coyote, you know?
Yeah.
We can all use that.
Yeah. If you're getting a hit to cross the street, cross the street. Right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
What about, I'm just very curious, like, have there been times when people have wanted you to help them and for whatever reason the information wasn't coming through?
Yes, there is a message that I can come across that is not all the information is in yet.
Yeah.
The other thing is that when I was working strictly as an intuitive reader and not as a coach, because the program in intuition from the Kaiser Institute, as I mentioned, they made me a coach. I loved that format because I could ask questions, and intuition and intuitive insight could become part of a conversation as
Yeah.
opposed to me just being like a performing monkey.
Yeah.
But back when I worked as an intuitive reader, sometimes people's intention for the information was actually malevolent,
Yeah.
full of malintent, or they had life and death situations that they were bringing to me. And that was a horrific amount of responsibility for me.
Yeah.
And I would have to stop working with that person because I could not be the sole source of information. It has
Yeah.
to be, the intuition provides insight into the current situation or past or future, whatever it might be, but it is not the only picture.
Yeah. What other pictures should people consider?
Logic,
Yeah.
logic, and what is feasible. Sometimes I might see something and suggest something, and the person may not be able to act on it.
It's
We're
just
all
not
stuck with
possible.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm curious about, Fran, do you ever run across people who expect you to know everything about them?
Yes. It's not common now.
Yeah.
It used to be more common if I did a party where I was the intuitive reader at the party, and there was one more person who everybody was telling them to get a reading,
Yeah.
and they walked into the bedroom I was in to give readings with their arms across their chest. They leaned far back in the chair, and they were like daring me, and so I heard them yell, "What's all this crap on this dining room table?" and told them that. And the person turned dead white and said that in their family, everybody put their papers and their clean laundry on the dining room table with the intention of folding the laundry and putting it away or taking the papers. And they were forever yelling that.
Yeah.
So they were convinced they didn't need to dare me anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what I used to do. If somebody really doesn't want, they don't believe it, or they're not interested, they don't need to come see me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure. Well, Fran Gallagher, this has been a fun conversation, and I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and hearing about all of your adventures. Again, I'd like to remind people that if you'd like to get in touch with Fran, go to reallyflourish.com and follow all the instructions there as far as contacting is concerned. Fran, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing?
Sure. I would like everyone listening to this to begin to notice how they experience what they experience in their inner world. That will help them discover what inner senses they have, and therefore they can then develop that sense or those senses.
Excellent. That's a great place to end. Thank you again, Fran.
Thank you, Franklin, and thank you to your audience. I appreciate anyone who has listened to this.
Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company. If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.